Um, so this session, there's no slides. It's going to be a panel talking about internet exchange points, especially within the Midwest. So last CHI-NOG we had Bill Norton talking about interconnection and how what kind of security benefits we have from that. We also had Ariel Vin from AMS-IX talking about their kind of architecture of the internet exchange point. This time we kind of want to talk about the exchange points within the Midwest, the geography of it, the importance of it, and kind of operating internet exchange points. So first off, what I'd like to do is kind of have everyone introduce themselves and their internet exchange point that they're representing. So David, if you could start.
David Farmer, MICE Exchange Point in Minneapolis. Did you hear me?
Okay, Mark.
Mark Cooper, representing AMS-IX Chicago, but we also AMS-IX Amsterdam, Hong Kong, Curacao, New York, Bay Area.
My name is Justin Wilson, representing Midwest Internet Exchange, Indiana, Chicago. We're a distributed exchange.
Cool.
And Matt Griswold at the end, who's representing United IX.
Yeah, Matt's on the way. So let's talk about some geographic issues. I think Midwest plays an interesting role within the internet's infrastructure. So I guess first question I want to ask is, in your opinion, how does the Midwest play a role within the domestic and international infrastructure of the internet? Anyone?
I'll start. I think it's a very underserved market, especially where I'm at in Indiana. We have most of our traffic goes to Chicago or Atlanta, so it's hauled a fair amount of distance to get to the content providers, things like that. And plus, we have a lot of clients that are looking for disaster recovery type areas outside of the major cities, and then an exchange can play into that.
I'll say pretty much the same thing, but from the other side of Chicago. For us, most of our traffic bounces off of Chicago, so Chicago is the problem. Exactly.
That's my next question. Don't get ahead of me.
And a little bit through Denver, and so but things are maturing and becoming a more rich interconnected set of markets, and there's some sayings that some guys in Montana. There was a senator from Montana that said there's a lot of dirt between their light bulbs. Well, so there's a lot of space between these big things, and there's some projects that have been happening with like BTOP and some other things that have filled in some of and provided some more rich interconnects that are going to bring even some third and fourth tier markets into some interesting pieces of this.
And again, I'd kind of reiterate, I think Chicago, from an exchange perspective, is a market that's been underserved. When we were looking to come into the US, Chicago is one of the names that just kept coming up time and time again. And especially the need for a distributed exchange. So our model is that we're independent, we're not owned by a data center, no one can influence us. So we'll go into competing data centers, which kind of opens up things for the customers that are not always in kind of the premier, most expensive locations. And I think you see what's going on in Chicago now with the exchange activity. It's an exciting time.
Okay, thanks. So as David kind of mentioned, the Chicago problem, I'm kind of interested to find out a little bit more. Does the growth of the IXPs in Chicago kind of help that problem, or does it hinder it even more?
Well, actually, I think that in a perverse way, the growth of the IXPs in Chicago helps the problem, because actually they're growing to the point where they can't keep up with themselves. So I see a lot of data center and a lot of things happening that how you're going to continue to grow your Chicago infrastructure is to start moving some of the stuff out of Chicago. So that's how you keep up with your Chicago growth.
Well, I've seen a lot of, and it's kind of a marketing thing, a lot of folks have drilled, you gotta get to Chicago, you gotta get to Chicago. Well, the question should be is why do you wanna go to Chicago? So a lot of these folks, especially the eyeballs, wanna get there for, Netflix, Akamai, all these CDNs. Well, if you can move those CDNs closer to the customer, that's actually better. But, like you were saying, if you're a data center and that's a product that you're selling, that's something you're going to push. And if you're kind of a leader in the market, then you become the authority on it.
And I think with the exchanges that are coming up now in Chicago with the distributed model, you kind of get away from CHI-NOG. I mean, CHI-NOG is obviously the location where a lot of the interconnection happens, but with what we're doing, what United IX are doing as well, we're kind of opening up access to alternative data centers. I think that should help the Chicago problem.
Okay. So I guess you mentioned on opening IX and AMS-IX in Chicago, but how does competition play a role within the metro region? Sorry, how does competition within the same region play a role in the internet exchange points meeting their critical mass? Is it something that, because there's so much attention and so much traffic, it's going to allow for faster growth, or is it going to be a lot harder to maybe compete with some of the incumbent exchanges that are down here?
Okay. I'll start then. I think most people you talk to, they'll say it's a good thing to have competition in markets. I think a market like Chicago can easily support 2, maybe 3 exchanges. There's always been one very dominant exchange here, and I think people are happy to have those alternatives. And I think if you look at like Netflix, for example, I think their largest deployment in the whole of the US is here in Chicago. So there's a huge role for the exchanges to play. And again, I think this idea of the distributed model, kind of breaking the walls that are keeping people within CHI-NOG is a good thing for everyone.
I think that there's this untapped market that they don't understand data centers, they don't understand how to do cross connects, things like that, so they rely on the sales folks, which, for all you sales folks out there, that's great, but, it's a little biased, and, sometimes rightfully so. But one thing we've approached is, the IX as a service. How do you get to CHI-NOG? Once you get there, we can help you get the cross connect. We can help you, do this and that, and kind of walk you through it. And I think that's a very missing part of some of these exchanges.
Yeah, I think that was one thing that we learned coming from Europe. You have the data centers which are owned and controlled by a single party. You won't have a data center with someone else running the meet me room. So for us, that was a very steep learning curve. And I think one of the most important things the exchanges need to do as well is to understand the cross connects, how they work in a particular building. And as you say, kind of be able to walk the customers through that. Because that cost of that cross connect and how do I get that cross connect in can still be a barrier to joining the exchange. So anything we can do to kind of smooth that is a good thing.
So you
got your breath yet?
Almost. We're still in multiple exchanges, right?
Yeah.
I think for me, the multiple exchanges, Chicago definitely does support more than one, and it's redundancy. The people that do a lot of traffic on pairing, you shouldn't have to just have one point that they pair at the same metropolitan area. That's all the breath I have.
So Mark, you mentioned cross connects, which is kind of interesting. The cost of cross connect is pretty significant because it is a cost for peering. So OpenIX kind of is an organization that tries to certify exchanges and data centers, and they try to kind of expose those costs to everyone. I guess what is your take on OpenIX? Has it benefited you directly, your inter exchange point, helping grow or enter certain markets, or is it mostly helping data centers? Is it mostly helping inter exchange point, or is it's great for the community, but we're still kind of waiting on benefits?
I think it's probably the third one. I think the direct benefits of OpenIX and being an OpenIX certified exchange are kind of difficult to quantify at the moment. But I think OpenIX is a good thing. It's a good thing to have standards. It's good for customers and participants that they know that, okay, if I go to an OpenX certified data center or an OpenX certified IXP, then this is the minimum I can expect. If we look at the OpenX standard for the exchanges, for us that's kind of the minimum level. What we do is 2, 3, 4, 5 factors above what they require. I think it's been good for the market. It obviously made some of the data centers relook at their pricing and their cross-connect models. And I think the benefit will come over time of being a certified exchange or data center. But it's still early days.
I think that certification and the defining of standards is going to be very helpful for the growth of the market in the long run. For the MICE exchange, haven't done any of the formal pieces, but MICE just came online in 2011, basically paralleled a lot of the OpenIX development, and so we followed it closely. We haven't done anything formally with it, but we've been going like, oh, yeah, okay, that's what we want.
Well, I think a lot of these clients looking at data centers, they're looking at what certifications does the data center have. So if they're wanting to join an exchange in that data center, having a standard certification for that exchange is just, one more selling point.
Okay. So in terms of Midwest, what do you guys think are some of the isolated areas that still could use internet exchange points or still interconnect region cities or data center, specific data centers?
We've identified several locations that we're going to. St. Louis, of course, Indianapolis, where we're at. We're a startup exchange there. Columbus, Ohio. We have Mike Hammett's back here somewhere. I don't know how many we have on the books, but they're all facilities that don't have an exchange but have enough players to do it. So we've seen a lot of people are coming from Miami to Chicago, Texas to Chicago on these long haul fibers, and they're kind of looking for someplace other than Atlanta to drop off at.
More on the western side, there's Des Moines, there's in various spots in Wisconsin. There's some proto exchanges in the Duluth, Superior area, and a number of pieces happening along those lines. But those were those third and fourth tier markets I was talking about.
And I would say, just from a purely Chicago standpoint, I would like to have a POP in every data center in the city and have a real peering fabric across the city, because it is 2015 and it's still hard to get from one building to the other. It's costly, it's a pain. It should be plug in anywhere you go and get to anyone else in the city.
Yeah, I think I'd agree with Matt as well. I mean, our focus is on Chicago. I think there's more than enough data centers to keep us busy for the next 2 to 3 years.
So talking a little bit more about the trends and specifically laws and network neutrality, how do you foresee network neutrality laws affecting kind of the interconnection system in the US and also other parts in Europe? Do you see it as something that's going to hinder it because of regulation, or do you feel like that's still going to only affect the last mile carriers? What's your opinion on that?
I think a lot of people don't understand what an internet exchange is. The people in this room are probably, a good majority of the people who understand what even an internet exchange is. So the politicians and things like that, by the time they get down to the internet exchange, it's going to be worked out in court. There's going to be these very defined, this is what it is. You just need to apply it to an exchange and, have an attorney say this is how it should be done.
Yeah, and I think from an international/European perspective, again, the governments and regulators, they don't really understand what an internet exchange is, what its role is in the whole internet and how things work. So they keep kind of looking at the exchanges, thinking, okay, should we regulate them? How do we get them into the legal changes that are coming? But at the moment, they've left us alone, and that's our preference. Just leave us alone. Let us do what we do. We don't need to be regulated or controlled.
Yeah, it's unclear. The one thing, so it's a two-way street though, is all I'll say. They don't understand us, but I'll tell you what, we don't understand public policy either. And so the only thing I'd say there is, hey, maybe learn a little about public policy. Just like we're expecting them to learn a little bit about the technology, we probably need to learn a little bit about public policy and the issues that they have to deal with.
Yeah, I mean, we have someone who works for us who's more or less full-time focused on regulatory and public affairs. And it's very, very complex, and he spends a lot of time, trying to understand what they're doing, but also to try and educate them about what we're doing as well.
I know, I think you put up earlier, the first thing today, like the majority of people here are telecom companies. So you're probably members of a trade organization, FISPA, or, one of those major trade organizations. I'm a member of WISPA, which is Wireless Internet Providers. And we have people who, there's committees that go decipher all that stuff and trickle it down and lobby and things like that. So, by supporting that, that's one of the reasons I support organizations like that.
Just kind of switching topics, but remote peering. I know there's a lot of people that are very against it. Some don't care, and some really support it. I'm kind of curious to find out. Obviously, remote peering is when you interconnect with someone that's not within the same data center. It could be another city or so. How does that affect, I guess, your operation of your internet exchange point?
That's something we have a lot of experience with in Europe. I think we were actually the first exchange to have a remote peering program in place. What we see in Europe is probably around 60-70% of our growth comes through remote peering. So that's people that see the value of the exchange, want to connect to the exchange, but they don't have a physical presence in an Amsterdam or a New York. So there's a group of companies like IX Reach, for example, who've made this a niche, being able to get people hooked up to the exchanges who don't want to deploy it into the actual city. And I know some people love remote peering, some people think it's actually bad because it's another thing you need to consider before you actually peer with someone. But as an exchange, it's a great way of extending our reach and delivering more benefit to the people that are connected to the exchange.
I would say that I think it's an important piece of the puzzle. From a MICE perspective, we're still sort of new, and I think it's something that new exchanges should tread carefully on. More mature exchanges should be thinking about it.
We're a fan of remote peering because for us, being a self-funded company, it allows us to get into other markets, into other data centers. If we have a client that approaches us and says, hey, here I am, I want to get to you, we can go and try to work and see, okay, how do we get to you, and maybe we can pick up some more customers, or turn that into a full-blown POP instead of a remote peer.
I guess I'll be the only one to have a non-biased opinion. It's just a really bad idea, but once you have market saturation with your IX, it's the only way to grow, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I can understand you might think it's a bad idea. And one of the things we learned was if someone says, yeah, we want to become a partner to do remote peering, is to do your due diligence on that party. What is their network? Who are they buying their network from? How financially stable are they? Because by us working with them as someone bringing parties to the exchange, that also affects our reputation. So that's something we've kind of learned over time, and it's something that you need to be careful of. You don't want to have everyone coming on doing remote peering for you. You need to do your due diligence on those companies.
Right, because it's transport combined with peering and wrapped up in one little package.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I would say there's remote peering, Remote peering, the multiple data centers has its issues, but that's a little more clear than 500, 600 miles apart.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, by the way, if anyone has any questions, please just let me know. Just step up. I'll continue with my questions. So are internet exchange points only for ISPs, or do you think that enterprises should go in there? And there's a different range of enterprises. Obviously, there's the large ones, small ones, and medium ones. But what would you like to see kind of offset the interconnection by having as many even smaller enterprises, or do you think it kind of makes sense for them to use transit providers and kind of stay off the IXP fabric?
So my day job is at the University of Minnesota. We're not a service provider. Well, we are, but not a. We serve education. We provide education. That's our service. But we also like to we also shuffle a lot of bits because we're creating your consumer for you. We do gig to the pillow in the residence halls. So we participate, and we've been trying to create an exchange. There's some other, not quite sure I'd call them enterprises, not quite sure I'd call them, they're definitely not traditional service providers. Particularly in the medical front, there's a number of clearinghouses and things like that need to communicate amongst a number of the medical industry, and so there's special purpose things that can be useful on the exchange as well. And they're important as a service provider. They're important to you because you might have customers that want to reach those things.
I think it's difficult for enterprises to peer because a lot of people they'd want to peer with won't peer with them due to like multiple locations or bandwidth concerns. At which point, if you can't put traffic over your peering port, it's cheaper to buy transit. But I also think is what the model we're starting to go for is if you can offer other services on your peering fabric, then all of a sudden it does make sense for enterprises to go there.
Yeah, like Matt says, we look at the peering fabric as a marketplace too. Hey, you're a VoIP provider. Now all of a sudden you have an advantage over your competition to sell to members of the exchange. I can cut 10 seconds of latency off your VoIP time. I do some kind of hosted backup. So then that opens up the door for these other revenue streams that they might not be there to save traffic to Netflix or something like that. They might be there to directly peer with a large customer of theirs and provide better service to them.
Yeah, I think for the enterprises, there's only a small subset of enterprises that get BGP and understand the value of peering. So I think the number of enterprises connecting to the exchange will always be very, very small. I think, as you said, there's some interesting user groups that can make use of the exchanges. So one user group we have is mobile operators. So we have like 26 of the largest mobile operators in the world connected to the platform, and they're actually using us for handing off LTE roaming data. So it's not enterprise, but it's a very specific user group. They use private AS numbers, private IP addressing, and we're seeing a lot of growth there. And particularly they're using the exchange and building basically PIs, so VLAN interconnects over the fabric. And we're trying to figure out, okay, the mobile guys are doing this, what's the next application we could find? Which user group can we find next?
Which leads me to my next question. What's the next application? Obviously, the biggest trend that's happening right now is cloud interconnection. Obviously, I was going to ask that. Come on. So where do you guys see cloud interconnection? Do you see that as a product that's outside of your realm? It's higher layer, lower layer, totally different service? Or do you see eventually getting into that business of connecting clouds, because most of the interconnection is going to be, or there's such a significant market between enterprises connecting to clouds and clouds connecting to clouds and vice versa. So is that something that you want to get into or not?
I think we definitely should because we'll be like internet on the internet. But I'm not going to field the question.
I think if you look at what's happened, so you've had the big cloud providers have encouraged the data centers to go out and build cloud exchanges. Data centers don't get exchanges, they don't get networking. So the cloud providers are actually driven fragmentation So you have all these competing cloud exchange offerings which are kind of similar but not quite the same. And I definitely think there's a role for the internet exchanges to be doing that. We can do it far better than the data centers can.
Still trying to figure out where that's all going.
Okay. Let's see. So I'm kind of curious to find out, what are some of the challenges that you have to overcome operating an internet exchange point or opening a new one that you kind of had to face?
I will definitely complain about that, starting a new IX. Nobody wants to be the first person on there. So you go from verbal commits, and maybe you'll get some commits on paper, and you'll have 20 people that are, oh, they'll all definitely get ports, and 3 months later, nobody wants to be the first customer. You get 3, and then we just had it happen, and then you get 10 the next week. But it's quite difficult. You guys are probably see the same thing.
Yeah, we see the same thing. What comes first, the chicken or the egg? You know, why should I join the exchange if you're only sending me 3 prefixes? Why should I go through the trouble? So we've had to do a lot of upfront capital investment. Hey, we'll run the cross connect to you. We'll give you some free transfer for so long just to get those prefix counts up, where you can then go to somebody and say, I'm announcing 200 prefixes, and they're like, oh, cool, okay. But if you say I'm announcing 10 prefixes, then they're like, okay. Then you have, one of our biggest things that we deal with is one of the slides said, 10 gig is the new 1 gig. We're having to buy 10 gig switches with 40 gig uplinks and things like that just to keep up. And it's just a switched network, so you can't layer on top service after service to pay for that switch.
Yeah, I'd say exactly the same. I think a lot of people underestimate the amount of time and investment it takes to get an exchange up and running and to keep it stable. And then seeding it to get people on is really, really hard. You can spend, as Matt says, months and months getting people to commit, because no one wants to be the first one on there because there's no value. But when you do, then it starts to roll really, really quickly. And that's what we're starting to see here in Chicago as well. We're actually surprised by the level of demand that we're seeing here from parties that we've never heard of or never spoken to, which is a great thing.
So MICE is my 3rd try at an exchange in Minneapolis. It worked this time. You just got to keep trying and trying and trying. Sometimes that's what it takes.
And was there something different you did this time that made it a success?
Had a few more partners. You got to get to that critical mass,
yep.
and then it just, then the actual, you get the critical mass, then the next problem is not imploding from the success.
Yeah, it's, in Amsterdam we've got 700 parties connected to the exchange. Mm-hmm. So that's a whole different scale to what we have here. I mean, I'd love to be that size in Chicago, but yeah, it is hard to keep up sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So why is peering so different in Europe than in here? And how do we want to change that? And if we do, how do we change that? Because obviously Europe has a much open model where there's a lot more interconnection, a lot more hubs. While in the US, we're just kind of starting to get that. And the OpenIX goal is the organizations to kind of help with that. But in your opinion, why is it like that?
Capitalism.
Well, there's geopolitics involved too. The US is a big single country. Europe is a bunch of separate sovereign entities. It's the difference between states and countries. There's a lot of differences.
Yeah, and I guess in Europe, if the majority of exchanges were started independently. They weren't started by data centers, and I think that has a big influence on how the peering market is developed in the US. So I think with us coming into the US, you've seen what's happened. It's really stimulated the peering market. There's more and more exchanges popping up. There's more and more competition to these kind of incumbent, kind of walled cage exchanges. So I think it will come, and people just need to understand what peering is and the value of an exchange as well.
Okay, one last question. So, talking about the future, well, what does the future hold for IXPs and interconnecting? Let's say if you were looking about 10 years, how are internet exchange points going to be different than they are now?
Bigger and more often.
That too. Like I said earlier, I think like we're going to start offering services over the exchange and value-added benefits, and really just try to make a metro fabric to try to bring internet to where I think it should be, and hopefully that's the direction it goes to.
I think I see the exchange being more of a software-defined type of thing. So, you know, you layer on top of all these services from different companies and whatever, and you can say, hey, I want a port in Chicago, or I want a port in Texas, and I want it to, you know, be a storage port. I want it to do this, this, and this, and it can be provisioned, you know, through the exchange, and just all of a sudden you have, you know, 6 services off your one port.
So I agree with bigger, but he said bigger and more of them. And I think there's going to be a lot more of them, and there's going to be a lot more smaller ones. Chicago will support probably an exchange of many hundreds. But there's lots of places where exchanges will be as we move along that will have 20 or 30, and an exchange of 20 or 30 people can be a viable exchange.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I want to make sure I have some time for questions, so if anyone has any questions, let me get your mic.
I was just sitting and thinking, and I guess this question goes for Dave and Mark maybe. So in the interest of getting more exchanges in more locations, Mark, will you ever go to smaller tier 2 and tier 3 and tier 4 cities? And Dave, do you know if any of the the mice guys ever going to go tackle Chicago or anything else? I think maybe the underlying thought is that in some of the smaller markets, you have a bunch of guys who are kind of doing it as a hobby or as something that needs to be done because they're the only people in the area with a lack of funds, right? And that's sometimes difficult to do. So maybe it won't be the small guys who move to the big cities, right? But so I guess it's going not to put everything on you, Mark, but it's kind of interesting to think like, okay, more and bigger. So I guess like from Dave, your perspective, what options do the other guys have going towards some of the major period metros, and then maybe, Mark, what thoughts do some of the larger European entities have towards going to, the smaller cities?
I think to answer the bigger question, I think there's still a lot of I think you call them NFL cities, that aren't being well served from an exchange perspective. So for us, it's all about scale and getting as many participants on as possible. So if we do go to any more locations, it's likely to be a larger metropolitan area that's not being well served, rather than a smaller tier 2 or tier 3 city.
I think so mice didn't, one of the reasons we didn't use the M as Minneapolis, we used it as Midwest, was we didn't want to limit ourselves to one location. But we got to make that location a success. We got to make the first one a success first. But we're looking at, we're reaching out. We actually have had several meetings of our group outside of Minneapolis, and we are trying to foster that and work with some of the other exchanges around the region, and either help foster them or work with them. But you got to take it a step at a time.
Any other questions or follow-up questions?
What are some of the kind of new technology changes that you're seeing, whether that's moving towards VXLAN or something else to do those L2 interconnects? And what are the things that you would just absolutely love to see some of your vendors provide to you that just do not exist today?
That was my question. I didn't read, but thanks.
Cheaper 100 gig ports. I think that's the trend we're really seeing this year for the first time. Is we have a lot of customers who have multiple 10s. The density and octet price has dropped enough that people are now doing the migrations to the hundreds, but I'd like to see those prices drop a lot lower. And the other thing is kind of SDN, not specifically SDN, but SDN-like functionality. You want to be able to do everything hands-off. You don't want human intervention on the exchange if you can avoid it. You want the customer to say, I want to have this service, this is my MAC address, give me this VLAN. So I think so port pricing, port density, and yeah, as much software automation as possible.
I agree with the SDN part, that pretty much covered it for me.
Yeah, the SDN part, and there's, as I've been looking at, there's two kinds, when you say SDN, that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. I see two primary pieces, and that's sort of the controller-based world, which is one thing, and actually that's not anything new with controller-based networking, has been around forever. The thing that I think is actually kind of new is the other meaning of it, and that is the orchestration or the software of the software-defined networking, and that's the important part. And so that orchestration is an API-based and getting the human out of it.
Yep.
Even if the humans, for the first round of it, is poking a web page. Someday it won't be a human poking the web page anymore either.
I think we had some questions in the back.
Yeah, it's John from IXReach. It's actually more of a point on the density of internet exchanges in Europe. Just to put it in perspective, you've got AMS-IX, DGIX links. They're separated by about 250, 300 miles, I guess. And you've got 400 million people now in Europe. So if you think about that, you know, it's bound to have that density. You've got whole communities, not too far to travel. So it's built up a very, very strong peering community based on geographical distances. Of course, in the US, that's a completely different story. Looking inside of your country. So I guess you have to start somewhere. The density of exchanges on the East Coast right now is actually going to build that community. I think you'll see that popping up all over the US.
Back to that quote I said, there's a lot of dirt between our light bulbs.
Echoing that a little bit, the fact is in Europe, if you look at the creation of data and the creation of the sources of traffic and how that's distributed geographically versus here in the US data is created very centrally compared to how it's created and published in Europe. And as we get more bandwidth, and I hate to use that word, but as we get more capability spread further out across the United States geographically, hopefully that ratio changes and we start seeing more creation of data and creation of the source content farther out, which would cause that ratio to change and therefore cause that density picture to change too.
Okay, we got time for one question and that's it.
Do you see any kind of gaps in measurement tools in terms of either measurement amongst peers there or for your own purposes, or is that a solved problem?
The ease of it is the problem. You know, being able to grab that data in a point-and-click type format, being able to know what this peer and this peer is exchanging back and forth is, it's possible, but it's not easy to do. So, it goes back to the automation factor for me. If I could provide those tools in a, very easy manner, that would be a very wonderful thing.
There's an inordinate sensitivity by some organizations to their measurement. And so that politics of measurement is something I wouldn't have guessed when I started this 2 years ago.
Great. Well, thank you very much.